Judith Breniger was a stay-at-home mother of 3.
She seemed like a real good mother.
And her husband, Robert, worked hard to support them.
He was really good to her.
But then Robert's son, Corey, made a tragic mistake.
He had accidentally shot his dad.
But was it the accident that Corey claimed? Or was it murder?
I had a gut feeling that there was something else.
The search for the truth would take almost 10 years.
I always just kept it aside.
Expose a shocking family secret.
He said, "Have you ever been tied down and beaten?"
And leave everyone wondering what kind of mother would turn a little boy into a weapon.
She is probably the most evil, wicked, despiteful person I have ever met.
Mark Center, Ohio, November 3rd, 2003. It was a quiet autumn afternoon in this tiny country crossroads, tucked amid the corn and soybean fields of western Ohio.
If you blink your eyes, you've already went through it.
Of course, most afternoons are quiet in Mark Center.
There used to be a little store there, but then that closed up.
But that afternoon, Mark Center's peaceful silence was suddenly shattered when one of its 400 residents picked up the phone and dialed 911.
911. I need right away.
The sheriff's office received a 911 call from a very distraught-sounding young boy.
The operator did her best to calm the boy down, but he apparently had good reason to be distraught.
What's the problem, sweetie? Okay. What happened, honey? Calm down.
In fact, it sounded as if the boy had accidentally shot his father.
It was unclear exactly what had happened.
But the result was tragic.
Can you tell if he's breathing, sweetheart? He's not breathing? Okay.
The operator dispatched emergency personnel to the scene, and when Cliff Vandermark with the Defiance County Sheriff's Office first arrived, he was met at the door by the caller, a 10-year-old boy.
He was standing there bawling, very emotional, and he had a phone in his hand.
The boy's name was Corey Breniger.
I remember when Cliff got there and grabbed me and told me to show him where my dad was.
But when Vandermark stepped into the bedroom that Corey indicated, the sheriff's office veteran quickly realized that the boy's father, 34-year-old Robert Breniger, was beyond help.
I remember him saying, "Oh no, he's gone."
As soon as I opened the door, at that point I knew.
Corey's father had been shot once in the head.
There was a bullet hole that entered on the left side next to the right side.
There was an extensive amount of blood and tissue on the right side and on the bed and on the wall.
And the gun that killed him lay close by.
There was a .410 shotgun laying on the floor next to the bed.
But was it the accident that the little boy claimed? Something about Robert Breniger's body didn't seem right.
He was laying on his back. He had bed covers up to his waist.
I had a gut feeling that there was something else to this case.
And the search for the truth would end up revealing a terrible family secret, one that Judith tried to keep hidden for years. Born in 1967, Judith was a native of Southwest Ohio, part of a large farming family.
We had lots of brothers and sisters. We had cows and horses.
However, Judith's childhood on the farm was far from idyllic. When she was only 3 years old, a tragic accident almost took her life.
And the neighbor's daughter was learning how to drive. When the girl went to back out, she thought she was running over a dog, and it was Judy.
The accident shattered the bones in both of Judith's legs.
She wore braces for a long time.
Judith's legs eventually healed, but her parents' marriage fell apart. They divorced when Judith was still a little girl, and her mother remarried.
My stepdad was a roofer.
Judith remained close to her father, though, and at 17 she left school and Ohio to live with him in Arizona.
She drops out of school before she graduates.
Judith wasn't in Arizona long, though.
She met a guy out there in the military, and she moved to Alaska for a while.
And when that didn't work out, Judith eventually drifted back to Ohio, where barely 20, she had no trouble hooking up with a new man, Scott Carwile.
She was this blonde bombshell, the dimples and the smile, and she was just adorable.
Judith and Scott married in 1991 and had a daughter together. But by 94, the marriage was over.
They eventually got divorced.
And by the late 90s, Judith was 30 years old and raising a daughter on her own. But she would soon have another shot at the stability that had always been missing from her life. In 1998, she met Robert Breniger. Born and raised in the small town of Hicksville, Ohio, Robert was a country boy through and through.
Robert was a big hunter.
He'd look forward every fall to deer season coming in.
Like Judith, he had a child from a previous marriage. Although according to Judith's sister, she saw that as a plus.
She kept calling me and telling me she met a really nice guy, and they had went out to dinner a couple times, and he had a little boy.
Corey was 5 years old when his father started dating Judith.
She seemed like a pretty cool lady, like she was fun. She was joking around with me and being real nice.
Robert's mother agreed.
I liked her. She seemed like a real good mother to her daughter.
And with his son and mother's approval, it wasn't long before Robert asked Judith to marry him, and she said yes.
She was real happy, and he was really good to her.
Judith and Robert soon settled into the rural Ohio version of the good life.
They bought a double-wide trailer and had it placed on one extra lot that I had in Mark Center.
Once settled in, Judith stayed home, raising not just Corey and her daughter, but the couple's new baby boy.
She was always doing things for them kids. She just loved being a mother.
Robert, meanwhile, worked maintenance at a local steel mill.
He was an extremely hard worker, worked like extremely long hours.
He worked all the overtime he could. He might only have 2 or 3 days off in the whole month.
Sometimes he would just sleep on a cot at work.
And even when he was at home, he often slept during the day in order to work the night shift.
He would sleep with earplugs in.
Although even then, Judith did her best to keep the kids quiet, or at least out of her husband's way.
Judy was always taking the kids outside. She always kept him busy doing something so he could sleep.
It wasn't an easy life, but Judith appeared to be happy.
She loved Robert to no end. I mean, he was so good to her and the kids.
And as for Robert?
He seemed happy, was happy they had found somebody again to share his life with.
However, there was at least one person in the household who appeared unhappy. Robert's little boy, Corey. Corey and his father had always been close.
Corey was always right by his side, always.
However, the divorce settlement also meant that Corey spent some time with his mother and other relatives too. And according to Judith's sister, that was a problem.
When Robert went and picked him up one time, he brought Corey in. He was all upset. He said, never again. He's never going over there again.
But in 2001, Corey's mother had eventually given up custody of the little boy, allowing Judith to adopt him.
She and my dad come and pick me up one day, and she said that she was going to adopt me, and I was kind of treated like one of the family.
Although according to Judith's sister, she had her work cut out for her when it came to raising Corey.
He was a little unruly.
And since Robert worked such long hours, it was Judith who had to deal with him.
She would tell my dad to discipline me, and he would say, I don't want to, you do it.
As a result, Corey spent many an afternoon in timeout.
We would go over and pick my daughter up, my second wife and I. And it seemed like every time Corey was in that chair being disciplined.
Exactly what Corey had done, Judith's ex and his wife weren't sure.
She just told me that he wasn't like the rest of the kids.
She said I was a problem child.
Was he simply having trouble adjusting to his new family? Or was Corey struggling with a more serious problem?
He was quiet and withdrawn.
I can't even tell you 5 words that Corey ever spoke.
He didn't smile. You never really saw him enjoying himself.
Whatever the reason for Corey's unhappiness, by the time he turned 10, Robert was planning to take some time out from his busy schedule in hopes of reconnecting with his troubled son.
Robert wanted him to go deer hunting with him, just like his father did him.
They were going to take a hunter safety course.
And even before the class, on the evening of November 2nd, 2003, Robert had taken Corey out behind the trailer to familiarize his son with a .410 gauge shotgun that had belonged to his grandfather.
And they were out target practicing. He was letting him shoot the gun.
But within 24 hours of that informal lesson, the 10-year-old would make a tragic mistake. On the afternoon of November 3rd, 2003, in the tiny rural crossroads of Mark Center, Ohio, 10-year-old Corey Breniger called 911 and reported that he just accidentally shot his father. Cliff Vandermark with the Defiance County Sheriff's Office was the first responder on the scene.
I had Corey stay back, and I went to the bedroom.
And when he did, Vandermark found Corey's father, 34-year-old Robert Breniger, dead from a single gunshot wound to the head.
Lieutenant Vandermark immediately took the boy away from that scene.
I took Corey outside, and we sat down on the front porch.
Sitting on the porch, the 10-year-old did his best to explain what happened.
Corey told me that he had accidentally shot his dad. He was going back there with a gun to talk about hunting.
He was handing him the gun, and the gun went off.
Mostly, though, Vandermark simply held the little boy while he cried.
I didn't do a lot of questioning. He was pretty distraught at the point. It was very emotional for me also.
Police officers were very nice, very kind towards me.
Rather than question the little boy, once the EMTs arrived on the scene to look after Corey, Vandermark concentrated on contacting his adoptive mother, Judith.
She was at a garage sale at her mother's house. She arrived at the scene probably about 20 minutes after I was there.
When Judith got there, she was kind of hysterical.
Understandably, the newly widowed mother's first instinct wasn't her dead husband. It was her son.
She showed up and took charge of Corey, basically.
She came and says, I want to get him away from the scene. It made sense to me. I mean, I didn't want that little boy to suffer any more than what he'd already suffered.
So within 30 minutes of the shooting, Corey and his mother were on their way to his grandmother's house while the sheriff's office started a routine investigation into what they believed to be an accidental shooting.
There were photographs taken and some evidence gathered, but it wasn't really treated as a homicide scene.
After all, not only did the little boy seem genuinely distraught about his father's death, there was some evidence inside the bedroom that appeared to confirm his story.
The boy at that point said that he had been talking to his dad about hunting and guns, and there were some what appeared to be some kind of gun safety pamphlets on the bed near the body.
However, even a cursory examination of the scene revealed a few things that were troubling. For starters, there was where Robert Brinegar had died.
He was laying in bed at the time.
In a very, for lack of a better term, peaceful position.
Even more suspicious was the fact that Robert, who worked the graveyard shift and slept during the day, was still wearing his earplugs.
Why would you have earplugs in if you're having a conversation about gun safety or hunting?
Taken together, the position of the body and the fact that Robert was wearing earplugs led at least some of the investigators to wonder, was Corey telling the truth? Or had his father been asleep when the shot was fired?
Some of the deputies questioned whether it could have happened quite that way. There were definitely some things about the scene that did not really match up with an accidental shooting.
However, despite their reservations, the investigators hesitated to take their suspicions to the next step.
To suggest that somehow this boy had purposely shot his dad, there was just no reason at that point to go there.
Who's gonna believe that a child would kill their parent?
The lead investigator, Detective Vandermark, certainly didn't.
I believe this child that there was an accident.
He was relying almost exclusively on the boy's explanation, the boy's statement.
And the other investigators at the scene simply followed his lead.
He had a lot of experience, and he basically persuaded the other folks that had some questions about the physical scene.
I couldn't believe that a 10-year-old could have done anything else but be in an accident.
And when the file on the case was closed, his first impression became the official one.
The sheriff's office was adamant this was an accidental shooting.
The official ruling appeared to satisfy the family.
It accidentally discharged. I had always felt that as he came into the bedroom, he had tripped on the rug.
And he dropped the gun, then it went off when the butt hit the floor.
Besides, the family already had its hands full dealing with the aftermath of Robert's sudden death.
Everything was chaotic. I comforted Judy as much as I could because she was very upset, naturally.
She was so depressed. She just wanted to lay in bed. It's like she had nothing to live for.
And things were even worse for 10-year-old Corey.
Every night I would wake up, it didn't matter, always thinking about it. I mean, I could be in school and it would just hit me. I mean, it affected me every day.
Friends and family did their best to comfort the little boy.
I would hug him and tell him, it's going to be okay. It was an accident.
And even law enforcement tried to look out for him.
I actually stopped by a couple times just to check on Corey because I felt so bad for the young man.
Judith did eventually pull herself together, though. Not long after the shooting, she and the 3 kids left Mark Center.
We moved quite a bit.
And after a year or two, Judith started dating again.
She was seeing guys here and there.
Eventually, she even remarried, becoming Judith Hawkey and losing touch with her former in-laws.
Judith and I kind of disconnected. We didn't have any argument or anything like that. It was just that she made it kind of clear that she didn't want me around, and I felt that it would be better for Corey that if I wasn't coming and interfering and causing irritation in the household.
Over time, Corey did attempt to move past the tragedy.
He seemed like he was trying to block the whole thing out.
But there was no avoiding the rumors about the shooting that regularly circulated among his classmates.
Rumors that it happened while they were hunting. It happened while he was explaining gun safety. The only thing you knew was the gun went off and it killed his father.
As a result, Corey became even more withdrawn.
He had written a biography of sorts for a school teacher describing that no one would understand what his life was like.
And there was trouble at home, too.
I actually moved out at the end of my junior year.
Corey moved in with a friend's family and managed, more or less, to struggle through his senior year.
He started acting out, doing a lot of crazy stuff at school.
Including one instance that few of his classmates would ever forget. It was during shop class when several students were chatting to pass the time while working on their projects.
Talking about things, you know, I have it this bad at home. And another kid would say, well, I have it this good or bad at home.
Corey, at the back of the classroom, was strangely silent during the discussion until suddenly...
Corey says, you guys don't have a clue.
And when one of his cockier classmates asked Corey to prove it, his reply left them speechless.
He said, have you ever been tied down and beaten?
By the spring of 2012, it had been almost 9 years since Judith Honkey's husband, Robert Brenniger, had been shot and killed by his 10-year-old son, Corey, in the family's Defiance County, Ohio home.
It was pretty much accepted that it was accidental.
That was the official ruling, but there were lingering rumors and questions about the shooting.
There was just something odd about it.
And Corey had clearly been haunted by something ever since his father's death. Some secret behind the shooting.
There were a few instances where I almost came out and told a teacher and a friend.
Including one instance in shop class during his senior year, when he'd hinted at the possibility that he'd been abused.
You could tell by the emotion in his face, the tears in his eyes, the welling up of his breath. He wasn't making this stuff up.
Was abuse the real reason that Corey had shot his father? When the teacher spoke to him privately after class, Corey had shrugged it off.
I said, well, then we need to do something about this. You know, it's been so long ago, it's not worth doing anything about.
And after that, he never really spoke of it again.
I always just kept it inside.
However, that March, another teacher would finally get through to the troubled teen. It was a warm spring evening, not long before graduation, when Corey dropped by a high school softball game.
I ran into my old gym teacher. Her daughter was playing, and I hadn't seen her in a few years, so we got to talking.
This was somebody that he trusted and that he felt comfortable with.
So comfortable, in fact, that he started discussing his troubles at home.
I told her that I had moved out of Judith's house and I was out on my own. I was staying with one of my friends.
But then, as Corey opened up, the conversation took a darker turn.
She actually looked at me and said, I know it's not the truth about what happened to your dad.
Corey was stunned. After years of rumors, someone had come right out and said it.
The shock hit me and I started crying.
His world was really breaking down around him because he had kept this inside for so long.
And after almost 9 years of keeping the secret locked inside,
I told her the truth.
The truth was so explosive that Corey's teacher immediately contacted the authorities. And when he got to school the next morning, they were waiting.
I was called down to the office and Cliff was there.
It had been almost 9 years since Cliff Vandermark, now a lieutenant with the Defiance County Sheriff's Office, had sat on that front porch with the frightened little boy who just shot his father.
What happened that day was, to be real honest, there was things I overlooked because I allowed the emotion to control me that day.
But almost 9 years later, in the principal's office, Corey finally confessed what many had long suspected.
Corey told me that he had intentionally shot his father.
I was scared, I was relieved. There was so much going through my head.
Lieutenant Vandermark was shaken by the revelation, but he was also determined to uncover the entire truth.
I had a lot of questions to ask. We went through and talked about it. He told me about some severe abuse.
According to Corey, the abuse had led directly to his father's death. However, in his second stunning admission, he revealed that his father hadn't been the abuser. Instead, he claimed that it was Judy.
He came out and said, she made me do it.
His story was that he had been forced and coerced by her to shoot his dad.
Corey claimed that it was hardly the first thing Judith had forced him to do either. In fact, he made his adoptive mother sound more like an evil stepmother.
She would make me do all the housework. I was basically a maid or a slave.
And if he didn't?
She wouldn't feed me.
That was hardly the worst of what Corey described, though.
The amount of abuse and really torture was horrific.
She would beat me with a belt. She was burning my genitals with a lighter.
And his half-brother and Judith's daughter, did they suffer the same sort of abuse? Not according to Corey.
They were treated better because they were actually her kids, whereas I was adopted.
Corey also claimed that he'd never told anyone about Judith's abuse.
She had so much control over him, he was in fear of her.
Fear and control that allowed Judith to keep her abuse well hidden, according to Corey.
She would make me wear long-sleeve turtlenecks to school to cover up all the marks and bruises.
In fact, Corey said that Judith even managed to hide the abuse from his father.
She never disciplined me in front of my father.
But how did she convince him to kill his father? The answer, if what Corey told the authorities was true, may have been the most twisted part of the entire tale.
Judith told me that my dad had cancer.
Judith told Corey his dad was in tons of pain. His dad really wanted somebody to end that pain for him.
Corey was so brainwashed by what he had been told that he felt that he was actually helping out his dad.
Finally, after recounting what he claimed was the true story of his father's death, the 19-year-old wrapped up his disturbing tale with a single question for Lieutenant Vandermark.
Corey looked at me and says, "Am I going to jail now?"
He believed that it was all his fault. He assumed he was going to jail.
I had to look at him and said, "I don't know what's going to happen."
And then, Lieutenant Vandermark told Corey something else, something the teenager desperately needed to hear.
He said he believed me.
Of course, Vandermark had believed Corey before, back in 2003, when the 10-year-old told him the shooting had been an accident.
I got caught up in the emotion as an investigator, which oftentimes we shouldn't.
And he was determined not to make the same mistake twice.
It was important to us after we left there to go back and revisit everything to corroborate what he was saying.
As a result, the investigators spent the better part of a year trying to verify Corey's story.
There was over 80 people that we interviewed.
Among them were several of Corey's old teachers from elementary school.
There were several teachers who noticed that he would be wearing long sleeves and turtlenecks and clothing that was really inappropriate for hot weather.
We actually found a teacher that had a drawing of his face when he was in second grade with bruises on it.
The school officials would contact Judith about what they observed, and she, of course, would say it was nothing.
When the investigators questioned Robert Brenniger's mother, she also remembered something peculiar about Corey's childhood. The way that whenever the family was together, Judith was always hovering in the background, keeping an eye on Corey.
She wouldn't let me out of her sight.
I was never in the room alone with Corey.
Robert's mother hadn't thought anything of it at the time, but in hindsight, the explanation seemed obvious.
So that there was no chance that he would ever tell me what was going on.
And when the investigators interviewed Judith's ex-husband, he told them that while he'd never witnessed Judith abusing their daughter, she'd gotten violent with him on numerous occasions.
I had things thrown at me. I was struck in my sleep. She would constantly slap me in the face.
However, that wasn't all he told the investigators. Judith's ex may have never witnessed her abusing their daughter, but he did claim that when she babysat other children, her approach to discipline had been exceedingly harsh.
She would punish them by setting them on chairs for hours, stare at walls, drill sergeant type discipline.
But had the drill sergeant turned her adopted son into a killer? After a year of investigation, the authorities were convinced. And on March 7th, 2013, almost 10 years after the shooting that killed her husband, the Defiance County authorities placed Judith under arrest for murder.
My oldest sister called me and said, "Oh my God, it's all over the news. They arrested Judy today." I said, "For what?" And when she told me, I was like, "What? No way. No way."
Corey Brenniger was not arrested, though, despite admitting to pulling the trigger.
The reason that Corey wasn't charged was because at the time this offense was committed, he was 10 years old. And we strongly believe that Corey was forced to do this.
Corey would have his day in court, though. As the state's star witness against Judith, their entire case was built around his account of the shooting and the abuse that led up to it.
It come down to his credibility. We had to show that Corey was telling the truth.
On Monday, October 28, 2013, Judith Hockey went on trial in Defiance County, Ohio. The 46-year-old was charged with murder for her role in the 2003 shooting death of her husband, Robert Brenniger.
It took about 10 years to actually get from the shooting to the trial.
And that was largely due to the fact that Corey had waited almost 9 years to come forward and admit that the shooting wasn't the accident that he'd initially claimed.
Judith had made me walk into my dad's room and shoot him in the head.
He had carried that secret for all those years.
But why would Judith make Corey shoot his father? According to the prosecution's opening statement, it was for a very simple reason: money.
There was around $332,000 in insurance money.
She had also collected the death benefits from Robert's Social Security,
which pushes it close to $1 million.
She certainly had a financial motive.
And according to the prosecutors, she had wasted no time collecting either.
She had, within less than about 12 hours after the shooting, gone to process a claim for life insurance.
But while the prosecution claimed that Judith's motive to murder Robert was easy to understand, The way she had carried it out was almost unimaginable, turning a 10-year-old child into a weapon.
It's a murder case, but this is a case about child abuse, first and foremost.
Among the first witnesses the prosecution called was a child psychologist.
She indicated that Corey was absolutely believable.
A 10-year-old boy would pretty much do whatever that abusive adult was telling them to do.
The psychologist also said that it wasn't surprising that it took years for the truth to come out.
It's not unusual for young adults to disclose things that had happened to them when they were younger.
The prosecutors claimed that Corey carried the physical scars of his abuse too. And they had a witness to testify to it.
He was interviewed and examined by a medical doctor, a child abuse expert, who did find scarring on his genital area,
which, in the expert's opinion, corresponded to Corey's claim that Judith had burned him with a lighter.
She had believed that he was telling the truth.
But would the jury believe Corey? Because the prosecution's entire case against Judith hinged on his testimony.
We were very concerned about whether he emotionally would be able to handle getting up there and having to talk about this again.
And with so much riding on his performance, Corey was understandably nervous when he took the stand.
It was going to be an uphill battle, but I stayed on my course and hoped for the best.
However, even as he testified against her, he couldn't bring himself to look at the woman sitting at the defense table.
I couldn't look at her. Fear would just prevent me from ever being able to face her.
Corey never once looked at Judith, but he slowly, carefully explained just why he feared her so much in excruciating detail.
He described being placed in a bathtub of really cold water and being shoved down in the bathtub.
She beat me and hit me whenever she could.
She had threatened to cut off his penis and put a knife to his genitals.
I was shocked. I was angry that my grandson had to go through all this pain.
And according to Corey, he'd gone through it for years.
She had to condition Corey to a point of control. And that's what she did. She gained complete control through fear.
And then, once he'd been properly conditioned,
she had told him initially that his dad had a brain tumor and needed to be shot and put out of his misery.
That he was worried about being able to support the family after his death, and that if he committed suicide, there would not be insurance payout.
Corey said that he had agreed to do what his adoptive mother asked.
It really didn't matter whether he was sick or not. I still had to do what Judith said.
And then, fighting back tears, he told the spellbound courtroom just how he had killed his father. According to Corey, Judith had been waiting for him when he got off the school bus on the afternoon of November 3rd, 2003.
She told me that today was the day, and that the gun was in the laundry room.
Then, once she explained what she wanted him to do, Judith had taken the other two children to the garage sale, leaving him alone with his father.
My dad was asleep at the time, so I was just supposed to take the gun in there and make it look like an accident.
Fighting back tears, Corey told the jury how he had crept into the room where his father slept.
I was close to breaking a few times.
But in the end, he managed to get the story out, how he'd essentially executed his sleeping father.
As soon as he had shot his father, he could hear him gurgling and he knew he was dying.
Next, according to Corey, he'd placed several hunting and gun safety pamphlets on the bed beside his dying father, picked up the phone, and dialed 911.
When I called 911, I told them the story that Judith made me recite and remember.
It was powerful testimony, so it was no surprise that when it was the defense's turn, they focused their efforts on attacking Corey's credibility, starting with his claims of abuse.
They offered some pictures of Corey with siblings and that sort of thing as a boy and as a young teenager and so on. Some happy pictures at the fair or wherever.
I would go out and visit with Judy and the kids. We'd make popcorn, pizza, whatever, and we'd all cuddle up on the couch under a blanket and watch TV, watch movies. I see no signs of anything.
And if he had suffered abuse, the defense claimed it had happened at the hands of someone else before Judith adopted him.
I believe that is why he was so believable to the psychologist, because it actually happened to him, but it wasn't her. He had transferred the blame to Judy.
And Corey's claims about the shooting, the defense argued that was a lie too.
Law enforcement had concluded that this was an accident and they got it right.
The defense also claimed that it was no coincidence that Corey had waited until his mother remarried to accuse her of murder.
They said that Corey was jealous of his new stepfather.
He just didn't understand about moving on and having a relationship, I guess, with somebody. And I think it was just so shocking to him when she did get married.
That wasn't the only reason Corey had been angry with Judith either, according to the defense.
She didn't give him some of the Social Security money and life insurance benefits. She did really limit his access to finances through his teenage years.
And according to the defense, between his anger over Judith's marriage and the feeling that she'd somehow cheated him of his share of his father's estate, Corey had decided to make a false accusation against Judith.
There was some suggestion that he was out to punish her.
And no matter what the defense said, there was still a chance that he might. Because when the case went to the jury on November 8th, the decision still hinged on one thing.
To convict Judith, they had to believe Corey. There was no way around it.
On November 8, 2013, the jury in Judith Honkey's murder trial announced it had just reached a verdict. The 46-year-old was accused of masterminding the 2003 murder of her husband, Robert Breniger, at the hands of his then 10-year-old son, Corey.
We had to get the jury to make that leap. They had to see that she manipulated and controlled this child to a point that he walked into a room and took a shotgun and put it inches away from his dad hadn't pulled the trigger.
But had they asked too much of the jury? It had taken barely 2 hours to reach a verdict.
I was a little concerned, if it comes back that quickly, that they just didn't believe, the case as we had presented it.
It was a bitter disappointment for Corey.
I remember my heart just sinking.
And then, when the verdict was announced,
I just instantly lost. I started crying.
The verdict was guilty as to all counts.
Judith and her family were just as stunned as Corey, although for far different reasons.
We just couldn't believe it. I just thought, oh my God, how? How could they believe the story?
Although if anyone had any doubts, they may have been erased as the bailiffs escorted Judith from the courtroom.
She was making lunging attempts to get at me.
Corey wouldn't have to fear Judith any longer, though. On December 19th, the judge sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
When she was sentenced, it just felt like my life could start. I would never have to look behind me to see if she was back there.
But he will forever be haunted by what she made him do.
That young man shuts his eyes every day and sees the death of his father.
And for many, that's what makes Judith's crime so disturbing. Not only did she murder her husband, she almost destroyed her adopted son, too.
In the 33 years that I've been working, I never, ever had a case like this where somebody would take a 10-year-old child and use them as an instrument of death.
She is probably the most evil, wicked person I have ever met. Do I feel that she got what she deserved? Not yet.